Hey guys, welcome back to week 10 of the MIT Challenge, which is to learn MIT's 4-year computer science curriculum in 12 months without taking any classes or even being enrolled at MIT. And today I wanted to take a little bit of a break to talk about just reflecting on my experiences of finishing 8 classes. I'm working on 9 and 10 right now. And just using this sort of unconventional model of education where I'm teaching myself things for free, just using resources on the internet, and I'm benchmarking it against an existing academic curriculum. I just wanted to talk about some of the pros and some of the cons that I've been finding in doing this process. But first, let me just say that I found that the benefits so far for me have greatly outweighed the cons. So if you're thinking about doing this, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's better than doing formal education for most people or in all situations. But if you're thinking about, I want to learn something on my own, I have found this process that I've been going through every single week to be incredibly rewarding and incredibly satisfying compared to formal education. So one of the big advantages I've noticed is just that the pace and schedule that you're working, you get to set yourself. Now, I've been working on a very intense schedule, but if you're teaching yourself something, you can take longer for hard classes and you can take less time for easier classes. And that's a huge, huge benefit because there's this concept in psychology called flow. And basically what it means is that when you're in a state of flow, that's when there's a lot of intrinsic motivation. It's what athletes say when they're in the zone. It's what you feel when just work happens. You don't really need to force yourself to do it, and you really enjoy working. And the problem is that when you're in a traditional academic environment, you're not setting the pace. The pace is defined either by the curriculum or by the group of students you're with. So if you find a class too easy, then you're going to be bored for long stretches of time. And anyone who's sat through a lot of university lectures can definitely relate with that feeling. And if the pace is too fast or it's going too quickly, then you get really frustrated and you also don't get in the flow. So people who are cramming for exams that they don't really understand also understand this kind of curiosity zapping feeling of things just being too difficult. And when you're doing self-education in this format, you get to tune the progress of the challenge or the progress of what you're doing directly to what is going to get you in the flow state. So it's way more enjoyable. So I think that when people complain about learning and they don't really like studying that much or learning things, it's not because they don't like learning. Learning is such a positive experience. You get these aha moments and you get insight into the way the world works. The reason people don't like it is because they're being forced to adopt this pace, which may not be right for them. So that's one of the first advantages I noticed. Second obvious advantage is that it's way cheaper and easier than going through formal education. And cheaper in that the cost of this entire MIT challenge I'm doing will probably be on the order of $2,000, maybe $3,000, and I'm buying a lot of the textbooks. If I really wanted to be very cheap about it, I could make it even lower. I could get books from the library, but I'm going for a little bit more efficiency and trying to go with the actual textbooks they recommend. But you could even cut it down to less than that. And that's for an entire 4-year degree, whereas most institutions, that could be tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to get an entire degree's worth of education. So the cost factor is also a huge advantage. Another huge advantage is that it's just much easier to do. You don't have to be approved. You don't have to go through the bureaucracy of getting credits transferred, whether they'll accept your transcript, whether or not they think you are good enough to study at their institution. And so for some people who maybe are very smart, they have a lot of ambition, but they just don't fit into the current academic environment, then doing this kind of approach is a way that you can shortcut the entire system and learn the things that you want to learn without having to go through the bureaucracy. And the final thing that just has been my experience in doing this so far, and this even applies even though I've been doing it at a very intense pace, which can be somewhat stressful at times, is that it's way more fun. And I've done an entire degree, so I'm not just someone who's saying that everything that you're learning is always going to be fun. I've been through plenty of classes that I hated in university. That has definitely happened to me. And I can say that even though I hated a lot of classes that I had to do, and I still managed to study for them and pass them in university, I've enjoyed all of the classes that I've done so far here. And I think it's because the type of format has changed. It really focused on bringing out your intrinsic motivation, your intrinsic curiosity for the subject, instead of punitively trying to just fight for grades and try to fight for things in order to really just understand the subject so you have to get it to fulfill this requirement. It's really a lot more enjoyable. So that's been my pros, so some of the advantages I feel. So if you're considering doing this on the side. Maybe you want to learn something over the summer break when you're in a student in university, or maybe you want to even try to replicate what I'm doing and not go to a formal education process but teach yourself an entire subject under this format. I think there's a lot of benefits, and I think that more people should be self-educating. I don't know why this type of approach doesn't happen more often in society. But there are some drawbacks, and these are some of the things that I don't feel are drawbacks that are completely unavoidable, but they are some of the reasons I think hold people back sometimes. So one of the drawbacks I've noticed is that right now there are a lot of resources online for self-education. MIT has a huge OpenCourseware library. There's Khan Academy. There's lots of YouTube videos. But one of the difficulties is that assembling a full curriculum, not just individual courses smattered here and there, but a full curriculum right now in most topics is still fairly difficult. Computer science was one of the easiest. There's more computer science learning resources online, I feel, than most other subjects. And I think that if you were learning biology or history or one of those subjects, it might be a little bit more difficult. Now, the good news about this is I feel that that's a trend that's changing, and that in the last 5 years there's been a huge influx of new resources that have been added online, and I think in the following 10 years it's going to accelerate, and there's going to be even more. The platform of YouTube and other video channels means that anyone who has an idea to share can share it, and now it's more a job of compiling the infinite resources in the internet into curriculum so that if you wanted to learn a broad subject, you wouldn't have to spend a month collaborating trying to put all these different pieces together. It would just be there for you. So that's the first hurdle, is that sometimes it can be hard to find resources, but it's one I think has a bright side, which is that it's getting easier to do that. Another disadvantage of self-education is that you don't have direct access to help. And I don't think this is a really legitimate criticism most of the time, because if you're in a traditional college environment, you're not having one-on-one tutoring most of the time. If you don't understand something, you're doing the same process that I'm doing. You have to ask friends for help. You maybe talk to someone who might know the subject better than you do. Generally, you're sitting in lectures listening to professors. Most students aren't having very deep one-on-one tutoring or coaching with their teachers or teacher assistants. But even given that, it's still nice to be able to have access to those resources as a way of, if I don't understand a subject, I can go to them and really learn it from that way. And this is another thing that I feel is more a weakness of my challenge of doing this in 1 year than just self-education in general, because I have taught myself things in a much less intense pace. When I was in high school, I taught myself a lot of programming. And if you're doing things on a slower pace, then there's so many forums and online resources that you can really ask almost any question and get answers. So if you read a book and there's one or two things that just aren't sticking, even though you're trying to use all these techniques to learn them and you're really going through all the explanations, then you can ask for help and lots of people will be able to help you. Now, unfortunately, doing this pace in a year means that if I have to take a whole day to learn a certain concept because I'm waiting for forum replies and waiting to hear back from someone, that can be kind of difficult. So it's a little bit harder when you're working on an intense pace, but if you set your own pace and you can go a little bit longer and you can wait a little bit longer in between times, then I think that that's not really as big a problem about getting direct access to help, just because there's so many resources available online. And finally, another thing that's been a bit of a drawback, a little bit of a challenge that I've been facing in this MIT challenge, is that there's fewer objective criteria for really evaluating yourself. Now, I've been incredibly stringent in trying to pin down what I feel is a fair but also easily evaluatable method for judging the MIT challenge, mainly that for the majority of classes that are based mostly on final exams, I have the final exams and I have the solutions, so there's a fairly objective criteria there. And then for the few classes that require a lot of projects, I'm just going to have to post the projects and people will be able to look over them and kind of get a sense of what I've been doing. But with a lot of self-education, there isn't that kind of evaluative criteria. So although focusing on grades and focusing on GPA is probably not the best way to learn, if you don't have a lot of feedback of really knowing what you're learning and how it applies, then it's also harder to improve, to see where you're going and how to improve your methods. So I think that that's something I also hope improves in the future, is that there's more objective criteria. So if you wanted to do, let's say, an entire MIT degree on your own, you would be able to go somewhere and have them independently verify that you know all that material, rather than just, you're correcting your own papers and publishing them online like I am. There'd actually be maybe an agency or some kind of resource that would be able to do that. So that's something I'm also hoping will be a trend that happens in the future, that there will be more resources for people like that to do that. So basically, I think that the advantages of doing this approach, of this self-education approach, just in my brief experience of doing it thus far, greatly outweigh the disadvantages, especially if you're in a position where you don't need the degree right now, or you don't need the piece of paper. You want to do something entrepreneurial, you want to extend your existing education in a different direction, or even just you want to learn a subject but you don't want to go through a 4-year process of getting a degree. You can learn some subject in a more compact fashion on your own, just for the sake of getting knowledge. So I think that there is a lot of hope and a lot of potential with these things, and I hope that the drawbacks that I mentioned here are problems that can be fixed, and that there will be people who will be innovating out there that will be able to overcome those problems so that this mode of education becomes more popular in the future. So thanks for listening to this. This was a little bit of a rant this time, but next week I'll be updating you with more progress on what I'm doing with each of these classes and how the MIT Challenge is progressing. So thanks for watching.